Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back. If you are rejoining us from the penalty spot, if not, welcome for the first time. As you can tell, it's a much more intimate environment here, and we've found with all the other sessions we tend to get quite a few questions, quite in-depth questions. So, panelists, strap in for the end. With those questions, we don't tend to use Slido here because we are only sort of 5-10 feet away from each other. But what we are doing is recording this, as you can see with the camera in the back, for our on-demand. So if you do have questions to the panelists at the end, I'll come over to you with a microphone. Please put it to your mouth because that's to make sure that we're actually streaming this back to all of our on-demand viewers. With that, not live, we're filming it.
In real time.
We're not filming it in real time, sorry. I would say semantics, but yes, definition definitely matters, that sort of thing here. Sorry, we're recording this and we will be presenting it over the next couple of days and on demand in future of the rest of our event. With that in mind, I would like to hand over to Michael Broughton, who's sports industry consultant and advisor, to introduce the panel.
Thank you very much, Paul, and welcome everybody. I was delighted to be asked to moderate this one. I've been investing in sports for about 11 years, and I think for me, one of the big questions is streaming sports content, which I've been investing in. I just kind of put latency as this is here with us for life, so just kind of deal with it and get on with it. So when I was asked to come and moderate this one, I was excited to do some digging and get to know the guys and learn a little bit more. So, Mark Andreessen wrote a famous paper about how software is eating the world, and obviously at an event like today, it feels like streaming is eating the world. And actually, when I went away and did some digging, some of the numbers about streaming in the last couple of years with COVID, obviously, and other things impacting you, there are over 1.1 billion streaming subs at the end of last year. We added 149 billion in revenues to the economy, and in the US alone, streaming grew 37%. So I think it's fair to say that streaming isn't coming, it's already here. So how do we now deal with some of the issues with scale? At the same time, what's happening in the consumer world, if you subscribe to Stratechery, you see Ben Thompson writing about, we need to have relevance, we need to have immediacy, we need to have transparency. In sport, when immediate is real and live is real, if you're not live, then the kind of transparency and relevance dissipates. My wife asking me to record the sport and watch it later. No, just not happening. At the same time, the consumer believes that the whole world should be a bit like Amazon. I hit buy and the next morning it arrives. I want it now. It just happens. It works. And I don't want to know what happens behind the scenes to make it work, right? Just make my life really easy and simple for me. I then found out, and I experienced this, I was talking to the guys about the Iceland game, England against Iceland in the Euros a while back, and I heard the entire environment groan, which told me that on my streaming device, in about 20 to 30 seconds, I was going to see why everyone had groaned. And there's an opinion survey out there that said over 15 million goals have been spoiled in football from people literally either hearing a cheer outside or WhatsApp from a friend, whatever. And the best advice they could give was avoid distractions, which in a 2 or 3 screen personal environment is just nonsensical today. It just doesn't happen. It's not like I used to, as a kid, you just turn the radio off in the car and you'd be fine until you got home from match of the day. That world is long gone. So we also have the rise of watch together. Zoom parties and the like, watch together products that I know several have presented here. That adds another layer of issue. We don't just want to watch it now, we want to watch it together. And if I'm watching it 5 seconds behind Jed, that makes no sense because, again, we're living in a different environment, and it's a bit like watching CNN newscast from about 20 years ago, and all feels a bit juddery. So I'm going to hand over to Ben to lead us through what he does and how they approach this situation of, okay, racing is a very specific industry. How do we tap into new audiences, tap into new markets, and how do we challenge this technology issue we have at scale without the audience knowing? So Ben, over to you. Take us through.
Thank you, Michael. Relatable is a good point, actually. Why don't I start on that? I mean, my job title is Director of Betting for Racecourse Media Group. I'll get into that in a second about what we do. But why is horse racing relatable to an OTT conference? Well, clearly we have a very large streaming business, which I'll get into in a second. But latency. speed of pitches, fan engagement, etc. That was a key concern to us, and that's maybe a point we'll come back to through the presentation. So we've effectively been asked to share our experience and tell a story really about a meeting at the Zone, I think at the time, as opposed to Perform. With me asking Ed if he could help us out with can he solve a problem for us about latency, and we're going to tell you how we did that, and then give you an example of our biggest event, which is the Cheltenham Festival, launching the real-time streaming. I'm trying not to call it low latency. Real-time streaming. I get fined if I call it low latency. So real-time streaming at our biggest event during the year. We'll give you some stats on that. We'll show you how it went and some of the concerns around it being COVID. So clearly being significantly higher audiences than we'd ever considered before we actually launched the product. No betting shops being open, no people being at the racecourse, etc. So firstly, I'll give you a quick overview of what we do. So not trying to bamboozle you with a slide, but Racecourse Media Group in the middle. The key things here are Racing TV is a pay TV channel. We have 65,000 subscribers. Under that, if you like, Racing TV banner is our bookmaker streaming business. We have an international business. We're 50-50 joint venture partner in our data company for British racing. We see Hannah in the audience there. ITV are our terrestrial broadcaster, incredibly important to us in the UK, as the 100 or so fixtures broadcast on ITV each year, and we're the, if you like, the rights holder contracting party for that. And then we deal with all of our international stuff, and again in the partnership with CIS. But what I'm really talking about here is our betting business under Racing TV. So our context, our racecourses, there are 35 UK racecourses over here. Here are all of our shareholders. So those racecourses directly own our business. All the Irish racecourses on the right-hand side, we subcontract those rights from CIS, but if you put all of those racecourses together, that's 71% of all racecourses in the UK and Ireland in the domestic territory. We're responsible for the, if you like, betting streaming business. This is, if you like, our mission. I thought I'd put this up just to talk about, to highlight the kind of the future growth element of this, and to start telling the story about real-time streaming. And are not putting numbers up, but our revenue mix, if you like, you can see there's a kind of bias here to high street or retail or LBO, as Mike and I would call it, and our online business being 18% for full year 2019. And if I flick forward a year, you see what happens here. So online's hugely increased to 33%. Now there's two reasons for that. Clearly, some of 2020 is COVID, but also there's some legislation changes. So the 10 or so thousand betting shops or LBOs in the UK and Irish high streets, British and Irish high streets, I should say, have reduced because of some legislation. So online's becoming all the more important to us. And what I'm going to focus on is the digital or the streaming business. Context again. This is the growth of our streaming business from 23. You can see it's quite nice growth. The two Irish tricolores at the end are when we added the Irish rights, again growing. If I added a 2021 like forecast volume at the end, it would probably say 250 to 260 million, and this is in uniques, by the way. So that's delivering 250 to 60 million uniques into bookmakers only in the UK and Ireland. So it's around 45-50% growth, 20 to 2021. So why would you ask, would we play around with it? And why would we look at real-time streaming? So I put this slide up, and we're going to show you a video in a second. This is essentially about what is the opportunity. So the number on the left is, and it's 2019, so it's like the last full year numbers. This is online only, so remote betting as it's referred to by the Gambling Commission in 2019. So all sports turnover. This is UK only, 27 billion. If you then look at what football represents of that, which I think is 10 billion, or 37% of all turnover of sports, and then add tennis to that, so the two key in-play sports, or in-play betting sports, that raises to 12 billion or 44% of it. Now 80 to 90% of that, and I've settled on 80, of all of this turnover here, the 44%, is effectively in play. If you look at the number on the end, that's UK turnover on British horse racing turnover, so it's 9 billion. So 32% of the total, but as Michael and I have discussed, there's a minimal amount of that that's in play. That's really betting exchanges and some of the very large bookmakers like Bet365 and Paddy Power, who have a very, very small percentage of their annual gross turnover that's actually betting in play. So this is where real-time streaming comes in. So first of all, we looked at how do we look at in-play and how can we take that forward. So the first thing we did is look at our streaming proposition. We kind of reordered how we presented content, took control of all that content with Stats Perform through a content scoreboard. Key thing here is the bit highlighted in yellow that says lowest latency at its foundation. So the brief was really, we need to get ready to move into the in-play space. In-play is not going to be delivered just by a low latency stream. You need very fast data, GPS tracking, which we have, but it's not yet been launched. But the foundation to everything is start with the pictures. If a customer can't see the event that's happening in front of them in real time, then they have no confidence in order to place the bet in the first place. Horse racing is very different from other sports. It's not a football match that's 90 minutes long. A race could be anything from the Epsom Dash, 52 seconds, to the Grand National at 15 minutes. So that said, about 70% of all of our races are over 2 minutes long. So an in-play betting isn't necessarily an in-play bet, as in during the event itself. It could be a pre-play bet that's settled on an in-play outcome, but the user still wants to be able to interact with the event, the fan in real time. So that was really, as I say, the foundation. Latency. This is the key thing. I'm coming to Ed here. So we've worked with Stats Perform for 15 years. We have a kind of a strategic technology partnership with them. So we don't do our own streaming. We deal with all of our own broadcast, and we have our own studio down in Ealing. But when it comes to online bookmaker streaming, we pass the reins over to Ed effectively. So we have a great team at Stats Perform, and I'm just about to come on to explain how we've developed it. So over that 15 years, clearly we've had flash at 1.5 seconds, and then probably if you go back to that slide, from the start of that slide at 2013 to the position today, we've probably gone from 15% mobile streaming to 85, closer to 90% of our bookmaker streaming is now mobile. So 8 seconds on HLS is clearly not good enough. So that's why we went back to the drawing board. And this is the brief to Ed, as it happens.
Yeah, thanks for that.
So I said to Ed, I actually said a second, not less than 500 milliseconds. Can you build us a stream that's less than a second? We've ended up with something that's much quicker than that, less than 500 milliseconds, that can scale to 1 million people 365 days a year, whenever required. You need to be able to scale that stream at a second, or now half a second, every day of the year. The reason I've put 365 here is there's a second kind of caveat to that. The technology will have to be accepted by our partners, i.e. Bet365, the biggest bookmakers in the world at the time, Flutter, who are now, I think, probably the biggest bookies. So it wasn't just about the speed and can it scale, the technology would have to be accepted by our partners. And what we're about to show you...
One thing, 500 milliseconds for context, the human eye can perceive about 250 to 300 milliseconds, so beyond that, you can't see the difference. So as you can imagine, only 500 milliseconds is almost imperceptible to the human eye. So it's important to know, and we've been talking a lot about live and real time. At Phenix, we never use the word live or ultra low latency or low latency, because that implies latency at all. And our streams essentially don't come with any, very little. So it's important, live and real time are not the same, and that's a distinction we try and make. Sorry.
That's a good point. So after that initial meeting, around April 2016, kicked off a 3-year process that Ed, and particularly Ed, was leading from an architecture perspective, and we came up with, if you like, bring Phenix into the partnership with their real-time stream. And then the acid test always for this was, would it work at Cheltenham? That's our biggest event of the year. It's about 5x anything else. I'm looking at Hannah taking the Grand National out of this, because that is the holy grail. But when you look at it from a streaming perspective, there'd be 10, 11 million people watching the Grand National on a terrestrial TV through ITV. So the streaming numbers of that event are fantastic, but not as big as Cheltenham. Cheltenham's the biggest thing we do. We have to put an awful lot of work into it each year in order to prep for those 28 races over 4 days. So we're going to show you what happened during COVID when everything was closed, everyone was streaming or watching on ITV, and show you the results. By the way, this is 2019 when there is a crowd. We're then going to show you 2020 when there is.
Hetton Hill surging home, taking Nicky Anderson a record 7th win in the trial hurdle. Wins the county. And Vanillier is not stopping in front. If anything, he's going further away and he's running right in the Albert Bomb.
They're off, racing for the well-child Cheltenham Gold Cup.
Santini, a terrible jump there, a mistake there, and Champ has been pulled up.
Vanilla Indo is all out, that's out, but he wins the Gold Cup.
So I might just give a quick summary of that. So as we, real-time streaming at scale delivered, it really worked. So we went from our biggest event. Then during COVID, everybody at home, all betting shops in the UK and Ireland closed, 7,500 of them. So you can't, people can't go and watch in a betting shop. Clearly, we're going to get the biggest audiences we've ever had, and we had this new technology. So we'd launched it in June. We'd seen incredible growth during COVID and people being at home betting, to 70 to 80% growth. But then Cheltenham was going to happen. This was going to be 5x what we could have possibly expected. We didn't drop a frame through the week. We smashed every record we've ever had. Latency never increased over 450 milliseconds in 28 races, and hasn't done really for months and months and months and months. So it was everything we could have expected, thanks to this man and his, the technology behind it, and the actual technology from Phenix themselves. I think Ed's going to try and give us a quick
I'm not going to take all the credit. It's definitely a three-way thing, this, because we're taking the feeds from racing and we're using the technology from Phenix, so it's definitely a three-way thing, which has worked out well. Well done, lads. The big word for me, just like you were sort of sensitive around real-time versus live, I'm sensitive around scale, because live, real-time, it's not that hard to do like a number of low-latency streams is not difficult. To do 1 million is much more difficult, particularly when there isn't really a user case that exists for us to go and learn from. So we are going to go live for racing without the actual user case to absolutely guarantee that it worked. Now, it does work. It did work. We did prove it. And if you're interested later on, come see me and ask me how we got it to work. I'll tell you. I won't bore you now because I can see you all kind of glazing over going, oh, please, God, don't tell us how it works. But I will, if you're interested, come and give me a shout later on. So what Stats Perform do is we have products. We like to innovate products. And we start off with a basic kind of machine, a sort of sports machine. You tip rights in at one end and it sort of spews products out at the other end. And racing is one of our products. And we like to be able to innovate and create those products to try and match whatever crazy ideas the product team comes up with. We deal with 165 competitions, creating 35,000 events per year. I think that number is rather conservative. I think it's much bigger than that. It scales very rapidly. It's always going up and up and up. I've been with the business for nearly 10 years in 2022, and it feels like it's sort of doubled every year and changing all the time. So it's a big, very, very agile platform that scales and grows and can be converted for whatever thoughts come our way. The 165 competitions include an awful lot of fixtures. So one competition might be a football league, for an example, and of course that involves a lot of concurrency. Where the scary bit with racing comes from is in concurrency. So not only are we looking at big numbers from one fixture, but looking at big numbers on multiple fixtures. So we're able to do those numbers not just on a single channel, but over 10 different channels at the same time, plus a 24/7 channel as well. So it's a.
Do you want to touch on join rate as well? Because that's the really scary thing.
So this is the scariest bit of the whole project.
That's what keeps me up at night.
So yeah. So this was the frightening thing, really. If you could predict the numbers you're going to get, then you can build the infrastructure around it. But you can't always. You can't always know whether there's a particular interest in a jockey or a horse or an event in general. So the numbers that you might get, or maybe there's a pandemic suddenly comes along and just changes the entire architecture. You just
What's
don't.
that?
Yeah, you don't have those sort of things just up your sleeve. So part of the design of this was fortunate, actually, that we had kind of thought of scale, and the reason for that is because horse racing is quite quick. It's famously short. It starts and it's over. And whereas you might join a football match and listen to the sort of preamble, you might listen to Gary Lineker and a few pundits talking, betting not so much. They're off, you're in, you're out. So this kind of pattern of people joining streams massively affects short-term, real-time streaming. We really have to be able to respond very, very quickly to that. We have all kinds of conditions to detect. So if we suddenly discover that there's an awful lot more people join than we expect, we have to deploy an awful lot more virtual machines ahead of time to allow for that. And you guys, you've got some kind of good AI around that, which allows us to compensate for that. Shall I carry on waffling, or do you want to jump in on that one?
Sure. I think it's important, the term flash crowd is
Yeah,
what we
move on.
sort of use, and Ed makes a good point. It's about people coming in very quickly and then leaving on a repeated basis. Unfortunately, I can cite probably 10 examples from various boxing matches to other events where we've seen, the technology break down when you have 200,000 or 300,000 or 400,000 people join at one time, and the load just can't be sustained. And it's unfortunate for their technology, not so unfortunate for us. That's what we built our technology for. And I think one of the things that Ed alluded to, which is really important, it's not just the latency, and it's not even just the scale, and it's not even just the fact that everybody's watching at the same time, which we call sync watch, which is some IP we have. It's all of those things combined is what makes Phenix sort of unique in the real-time streaming landscape, is that we're able to...
We should mention adaptive as well, actually. We don't mention that enough,
Yes.
because that was a big deal. Remember when we first met, that you're conventionally, if you're running out of network, you would buffer, and we can't buffer. You cannot buffer.
There's no buffering.
We've got half a second to play with. We're squeezing milliseconds wherever we can in our workflow. So the ability for the network and the player to adjust and adapt according on network conditions was vital, and that's quite a rare feature to find in a WebRTC supplier.
Let me just pick up on your...
There's no
spinning wheels, not
There's
loud.
no spinning wheel. That's what buffering, for those who don't know. And for our technology, to Ed's point, you don't have the time, so there is no buffering. So we can't fall back on anything. We can't, when you use more traditional HLS technology and you have 20, 30, 40 seconds of time, you can do a lot more. With our technology, you don't have that time. So we've had to develop all this sort of on the fly, seamless to the user. And, I didn't develop it, let's put it like that. But
Thank goodness for that, Jed.
Let me just... I've never heard you mention the boxing example before, about clearly big ATT fights, etc. And actually the number that you mentioned, say 400,000 people joining at the same time. We're dealing with that every single race at Cheltenham. So all 28 races are around those numbers. Some of them are bigger, particularly the ones at the end that are not on terrestrial, or one this year, each they're not on terrestrial TV. We're dealing with that event every half an hour for 4 days, and and then the Grand National again, and very big races like the Derby, the Guineas, etc. through the year. And the system is such that it can cope with it. It almost anticipates what kind of traffic's coming. If it's using AI, and if it looks ever so slightly out of kilter, like, oh, there's more coming here, then it just auto scales, as we've discussed.
Yeah, one of the things worth mentioning is because we've had quite a long history with racing TV, we have got an awful lot of data. So we were able to train quite easily the expected viewing figures and also viewing punter behaviour. So we were able to detect spikes and detect particular events and simulate those as well. So we were able to sort of pre-warn. Should I mention simulation? Might as well. Now I'm rolling. So obviously we didn't have any way of testing this before we went live. We were all working from home as well, which was extra fun. So what we managed to do with Phenix was to create some patterns of expected punter behaviour, how we knew punters react to live events, and model them. And we got Phenix to generate, first of all, like 100,000 fake clients dotted around the globe in different cloud infrastructures. And then we tried 200,000, 500,000, 1 million. Did we stop there?
Yeah.
I think we would have run out of money.
The brief was we were trying to break it, but we didn't tell them that.
Yeah.
Ed
wanted
actually
to know
said
when
to
it
me
would
one
break.
day, I just want you to know that I'm going to try and break your platform.
So I gave them the idea that I was going to join 300,000 within 1 minute. I think we joined them. I actually threw 1 million at it in a few seconds to see what would happen. What would happen. Google didn't break. That was good. It does run in Google Cloud. It scaled well. It was on the basis of that test and that data, we were able to sort of present to racing TV with some confidence that it was going to work.
I think what would be interesting here as we're going through the loading up and down during the course of a very busy race is what changes for the end consumer, right? So, I'm watching at home because I can't go to Cheltenham this year. What actually is the end difference for me in terms of my user experience and what I can then do with a Flutter or Bet365 as well? What's the fundamental difference by getting it down to
Real time. Well, there's no from a viewer experience. There's no difference. So you would not, as Jed said, there is no buffering. The stream does not slow down. It's
as though that you're at Cheltenham.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I was at Cheltenham on Saturday and I had my mobile phone up and I was looking at the horses in front of me. Now, clearly, it's not live. There is a very small gap. I'm talking like 50 to 100 milliseconds off what's actually happening live on the track, and then I'll process after that. But what it allows us to do, and we've not cracked this yet, but if you look back to those numbers about the opportunity in horse racing free and play, it's the exclusive domain effectively of peer-to-peer betting exchanges, Betfair, etc., Betdaq, Smarkets, Matchbook, etc., with people betting against each other. So that exists. The goal for us is different types of data, fast data for fan engagement to improve the experience of how people consume horse racing and think about horse racing, but then also being able to have a flutter based on that information, which is what's happening in football and has been happening for years, is now happening more and more in tennis and in cricket and those in-play sports. And as we've shown you, 80, and it's actually a bit close to 90, I think, % of all bets or all money taken on let's just say football and tennis are in-play bets, whereas on horse racing it's very, very small. So there's a lot of work to do. And it's not just us that are working at it, it's our partners down the road at Arc Arena, at the races, whatever you want to call them. They're doing the same thing. So
I mean, it's effectively, how do we unlock that in-play betting market so that if we're almost a third of the entire betting market anyway in the UK, if we can unlock that 80% potential out there that technically kind of exists from
take
football
10
sports.
now, that would be an incredible achievement if we could get to 10. That's another effectively £1 billion a year. That's a lot of money. And Michael knows how we're funded, etc., and how we contract with bookmakers. So clearly we're not making £1 billion off of £1 billion of turnover, but the dropout from that would be a significant number.
Yeah. thinking of time and wanting to get some questions. The other one I really wanted to touch on, though, because this I did find fascinating, Jeb, was being able to do this synchronized. Right. So again, it's not just real time, but the fact that I can be watching a friend who's in a totally different part of the country or in a different part of the world, and actually what I'm seeing on screen is the same. So that, I mean, I love this, watch together kind of concept, and scenic, and there's a few others out there. That's some really cool stuff. But again, if it's out of sync,
Right.
kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally don't even know where you start with how you fix that.
Neither do I. So it's a piece of IP that we've developed called SyncWatch, and in a very simplistic terms, latency sort of, Ed's gonna not like what I'm gonna say here, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Latency sort of comes in two forms. The latency is the time from the moment of the field of play or the racetrack or wherever you're watching to your device. That's a certain amount of latency. And then there's also what's known as drift between all of us watching that race or that game. The drift is where the problem that Michael is referring to. All of us in this room could be watching the same race on the same phone, on the same platform, on the same ISP, everything is the same, and all of us would be watching it at different times using the older form of technology. With our technology, the same thing, everybody here in this room watching, we'd all be watching at the exact same time. Mobile, laptop, connected TV, game console, doesn't matter what you're watching on. You'd all be consuming that content at the same time. So what does that mean? It means that anytime you have sort of interactivity, gamification, watch parties, watch together, things of that nature, and of course the holy grail is betting. So those are the things that our technology has been able to solve.
So there's basically a clock running in the background, and the player is referencing the clock to make sure it's all synchronized. Now that only currently exists inside the Phenix platform, but we're also looking at how we can use that across all OTT platforms, that same basic concept, which allows us to put a clock into our contribution streams. So if you're interested in that, come and see me afterwards, because I'd like you to use that too.
I think it's just, to me, it's fascinating because I'm publicly in stating that I hate the phrase fan engagement because it's all about fan involvement and consumer involvement. And to me, the promise of streaming on top of what we do on broadcast is that there can be a two-way experience. Right. And there's some cool products coming into broadcast as well that enable this. So, but if it's out of sync, this all kind of falls over, and the fan is expecting it never to fall over.
Yeah.
No, you make a good point. I mean, people talk about latency as the most important thing, and certainly it is extremely important. But if you don't have both, you lose out, because even if you're a half second behind the field, but if everybody is a half second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4, well, then that experience just falls away. It has to be not only a half second, but everybody at the same time. That's as
I would say it was even more nuanced. It says latency and time, those two things together.
Right.
The latency and the clock are so important because that clock data can be interpreted by different people. So we go to our own player, which is what racing is, but in the other products, we go to somebody else's player. But if they could read the clock from that stream, they could therefore display data which is relevant to that user. So if that user wanted to see it in Japanese, they could have a Japanese display. Yeah. If that person wanted to see a specific bit of data to relate to that video clip, maybe it's a specific thing he's interested in or she's interested in, then they can press a button and get that data off that clip. So being able to reference data to a particular piece of time, I think is a holy grail. And also we're involved in VOD. We make VOD for racing as well, so it'd be nice to know, to be able to read some data back from a VOD clip. How fast was that horse going? What condition was it in? What was his heart rate? All that kind of stuff is really interesting to me.
Got a nod to our actual VOD partner sat in the front row there, Simple Stream.
There you go.
Little plug. Little plug.
I'm going to go to the audience for any questions, because I mean, to me, I'm genuinely excited because I think I like to look for what are the foundation technologies that we need in order to make sports catch up with some of the real world applications that I see. And to me, this is, as I said at the beginning, one of the ones that I had almost dismissed and said, we're not going to get there in almost in my lifetime kind of concept as an investor. So I'm excited as a racing man and from a racing family to see the potential for racing. I know as a man who's also invested in gambling companies, I'm very excited for the gambling companies for what it opens up for them, but also then in terms of streaming, what we can do from technology perspective of engaging our consumers to me, I'm super excited. So I'd love to hear some questions for these guys. I know they're prepped and ready for anything you might want to throw at them.
Bring it on.
Fire away.
Damn it.
We have a winner.
I appreciate the time, guys. I'm Andrew from 21st Group, and it's a new space for me, both on the racing side and the technology, so I found it very interesting. The question I have, and you started to touch on it there at the end, so would love for you to elaborate a bit more from the technology side and the racing side and the consumer side is where do you go next? So and I said you started to touch on it, but thinking about how punting is involved in horse racing and how to expand the interest
Can we go to
of
you're like
users
my
as well.
you're like my straight man.
There we
Can
go.
we go to
Yeah,
the next
I'll
slide?
take my check
No,
after
next
the
one.
meeting.
This one.
Thanks, guys.
That one. So what's next is this, basically. So most of you are familiar with the term in-play racing, and Ben alluded to it. There's in-play or sort of prop bets that are, will Chelsea score more goals in the second half than they did in the first half? Will Horse 8 win, around the second turn or whatnot? Those are all in-play bets. Those are all prop bets. Where we're going, because the technology we deliver is so fast, is will Ronaldo score a penalty, will score a goal on the penalty kick he's about to kick in 2 seconds? Will Aaron Judge from the New York Yankees hit a home run on the next pitch? Things of that nature. Those are what's known as micro betting or micro wagering.
Bet per play, effectively,
Right.
in US sports.
So the idea of it is that the odds change quickly enough, but the technology hasn't been able to meet that in the past. But now we can deliver that stream in such low latency that we can allow for those types of bets to take place. So that type of micro betting or micro wagering is where we think, and what we've been told from a lot of the bookmakers and broadcasters and sports properties, that's ultimately where things are going. I think there'll be some boundaries around it, but that's kind of one area of where the future is going.
I know in the audience we've got Vesa here, a company called Supernova that does, using AI, the billboards around venues. And I remember discussing with him years ago the dream of exactly that. I'm watching my iPad, Ronaldo steps up, I want him to miss.
Right there.
I could literally touch the billboard that is going around offering the live odds.
That's right.
Tap, never come out of the screen environment.
No.
The bet is made, boom, he takes the penalty, he misses, I win, everyone's happy.
That's right. And all that
Apart from
happens in a couple of seconds. So
I think
that's the idea.
in one of the slides of the book, which is the blue slide, which is kind of explaining our move to watch and bet, if you like, with the content scoreboard and then me just pointing at latency about foundation. That's what I'd say. This is the foundation for what comes next for us as a rights holder and as a fairly big rights holder in the UK. But this is not the solution. This is part of the solution. So fast data exists in other sports. We have fast data in horse racing. It's not necessarily exposed to the public yet. All broadcasters looking at Handler from a time at ITV. Our biggest audience is ITV racing, etc. So for fast data is really the next step for us and be able to surface that fast data through our biggest audience, which is ITV racing, and then our own pay TV platform, which is Racing TV, and then our fastest growing audience, which is streaming, because it's in everybody's hand. It's always on, always available, etc. So that it's what's low latency or real time streaming allows us to do is then augment. Thank you. Then augment the data in real time alongside the pitches.
From my point of view, it's about combining the sport data and video to have low latency video and data combined and synchronized and shared and crucially standardized, because I want to be able to take some sport that's happening in, I don't know, some venue in South America and be able to read it and understand it and render some useful graphics from it on a TV channel.
I mean, I know Jason Robbins of DraftKings is quoted as saying there's a whole bunch of products that they would love to do, but until they get the synchronicity between the feed and the data and get all this, they're doing all right as they are.
We have a proposal. We just haven't had the opportunity because of COVID to put it in front of SIMT or DPP and standardize it. But we do have a proposal. Come and see me. Let's make data happen.
Any other questions?
Hi, Dan Finch from SimpleStream. What, with the addition of DRM, how does that impact the low latency? And do you
You can
provide
talk a
that?
lot more than I can, but DRM is not supported by browsers yet for real time, for WebRTC. So we have a tremendous amount of encryption and security around all of our streams. So it's as though you have DRM, just traditional DRM, Widevine, Play Ready, all those things have not been standardized for browsers yet.
I would break the DRM down to specific requirements that you would want to protect. So if you want to control something like, if you're including in the sort of umbrella term DRM, managing the number of pixels, for example, on a particular device, or the particular streaming device or screen sharing devices, perhaps, if you're not allowed to screen share to a particular thing, these are individual requirements that need to be addressed as individual requirements. So the DRM term probably includes too many things, because we're not going to take a DRM off the shelf and make that work.
No. And sports is a little bit, there are still contracts that have a line that say you have to have DRM in them, but most people realize that it's almost irrelevant, because once the race is over, you can't really do anything with it anyway.
It's one of those terms that exist in boardrooms.
Yeah.
And then because they've heard it at a conference like this, but when you start to drill into what they actually want, it's not DRM. It's a specific encryption or a specific management of their rights.
Yeah.
And it's about drilling into those requirements, really.
And that's what we build, because we realize, to Ed's point, that that's really what is the important part, is the security of that.
And funny thing about low latency, which kind of carries on from the previous session around piracy, is good luck if you want to try and produce a pirate version of our stream and keep the low latent value in it. You won't. You're going to produce something vastly less attractive. So in a way, we're actually reducing some of the DRM overhead, because if you were to sort of stream it down line, you'd be looking at, it'd be over and done. I mean, it's not attractive at all to pirate something of such low value.
I can give you a different view of that around piracy. So Michael and I did discuss this, and we weren't going to really get into this, but as soon as it's come up, I'll mention it. It's so quick that it really takes out most, and I'm talking about kind of real-time piracy in order for it to be useful to a better, if you like. We had a problem with drones, and there is still a problem with drones at a number of racecourses in the UK and Ireland. But we know that our stream now is the same, basically, sync matched with basically the drone. So I've seen the illegal pictures of drones, and I get to see them fairly frequently. It's exactly the same frame for frame speed as ours. That doesn't solve the problem, because drones offer other height and angle, etc., etc. But it does take the immediate problem of an integrity issue of does somebody have a faster feed? It definitely solves that overnight. So clearly I'm giving you a racing example, but it should do that for most sports and most events. If you have a real-time stream, it really deals with the immediacy of speed.
Brilliant. Well, look, gents, I'd like to thank you for the presentation. Ben, congrats on getting these guys to put it off for you. I like that.
Thank them both.
Pulling on, but fabulous from the guys. Thank you very much for attending and for watching at home. Great to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, gentlemen. That is it for the penalty spots for both days. We now have about an hour's break before our next sessions, which is in the main area in the kickoff arena, and also at the breakaway upstairs. So those sessions will be beginning at 2:20, but if you head upstairs, you can grab coffee and lunch and recharge for the final afternoon.
Thank you.